On Christmas Eve, my parents suspended my schooling until I apologized to their golden boy. I said one word, "All right." By morning, my room was packed, and my Georgetown transfer was already approved. My brother went pale. "Please tell me you didn't send it." Dad's smile froze mid-breath. "Send what?" That's when I realized they'd never actually seen me as their daughter, just collateral damage in protecting their precious son's lies. "My name is Madison Parker, and this is how I discovered my Harvard medical student brother had been stealing my biomedical research for 7 years, publishing it as his own work. When I confronted him with evidence, he didn't deny it. He threatened me. When I showed my parents the proof, they chose him. Big mistake. See, while they were busy protecting their golden child's reputation, I'd been documenting everything: screenshots, time-stamped files, peer review communications, even recordings of our conversations. 7 years of systematic academic fraud, and I had it all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how the perfect family Christmas became the day their golden boy's empire crumbled, and how one word from their scapegoat daughter changed everything forever. What I found in Ethan's research files that night would make my blood run cold, but it was nothing compared to what I'd discover about my own family's role in covering it up. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While Mom bustled around the kitchen making Ethan's favorite blueberry pancakes, I sat at my laptop in the corner of the living room, methodically organizing the evidence I'd gathered. The house felt different now, like a stage set where I'd finally seen behind the curtains. Dad emerged from his study wearing his weekend golf attire, already checking his phone for messages from the hospital board where he served. He'd built his reputation as Dr. Richard Parker, Chief of Cardiology, on integrity and ethical leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me that his golden son was everything he claimed to stand against. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, ruffling my hair as he passed. "What are you working on so early?" "Just some research," I replied, not looking up from my screen where Ethan's plagiarized publications stared back at me. "You know how it is." Mom placed a steaming plate of pancakes in front of Dad, her attention completely focused on his needs. "Madison, breakfast is ready. Come eat before it gets cold." I closed my laptop and joined them at the breakfast table, the same table where we'd held family game nights, celebrated report cards, and where Mom had cried happy tears when Ethan got into Harvard. Now it felt like a tribunal, where I was the only one who knew we were about to hear a case. Ethan stumbled downstairs 20 minutes later, his hair disheveled from sleep, wearing the Harvard Medical School sweatshirt that had become like a uniform for him. Even on weekend mornings, he needed people to see his credentials. He slumped into his chair and immediately reached for his phone. "Put that away during breakfast," Mom chided gently, the same request she'd made to me countless times with significantly more force. "It's family time." He complied with a dramatic sigh that made Mom smile indulgently. "Sorry, just checking some important messages from my research supervisor. We're close to a breakthrough on the cardiovascular project." The cardiovascular project, the same one I'd been developing data models for since my sophomore year. Dad leaned forward with interest. "Tell us about it. What kind of breakthrough?" Ethan's eyes lit up as he launched into a description of research I recognized word for word from my own notes. He talked about methodology I'd developed, conclusions I'd drawn, data patterns I'd identified through months of late-night analysis. His voice carried the confident authority of someone who'd never questioned his right to take credit for other people's work. "The applications are revolutionary," Ethan continued, gesturing with his fork. "We're looking at potential treatments that could reduce cardiac mortality by 30%. The preliminary peer reviews have been incredibly positive." Mom reached over to squeeze his hand. "We're so proud of you, honey, following in your father's footsteps, but making your own mark." I sat there chewing pancakes that tasted like sawdust, watching my brother accept praise for work that had kept me awake for 3 years. But what happened next would prove that this wasn't just about stolen research, This was about a family system that had been broken for longer than I'd realized. "Madison," Dad said, turning his attention to me with the polite interest he might show a distant relative, "how are your studies going? Still enjoying the biochemistry program?" "It's good," I replied carefully. "I've been working on some interesting projects, actually some cardiovascular research that's showing promising results." Ethan's fork paused midway to his mouth. His eyes met mine across the table, and I saw something flicker there. Not guilt or shame, but calculation. He was trying to figure out how much I knew. "That's nice, sweetie," Mom said absently, already standing to refill Dad's coffee. "Maybe when you get to graduate school you can collaborate with Ethan. He could mentor you." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a fire I was about to set. Ethan's face had gone pale, but he recovered quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "I'd be happy to help Madison, though the level of research at Harvard is pretty advanced. It might be challenging for an undergraduate to contribute meaningfully." That condescending comment was the moment I decided they needed to know everything. Not just about the plagiarism, but about the systematic way they'd all participated in diminishing me while elevating him. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork with deliberate precision, "I think you'd be surprised by what undergraduates can contribute. Sometimes fresh perspectives lead to breakthrough insights." Dad nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude, Madison. Confidence is important in research." "Speaking of research," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I've been doing some investigation into academic integrity standards. It's fascinating how quickly plagiarism can be detected now with modern software." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan's hand tightened around his coffee mug, his knuckles white against the ceramic. Mom and Dad, oblivious to the undercurrent, continued eating their breakfast. "Plagiarism?" Mom laughed. "Well, that's certainly not something our family needs to worry about. We've raised you both to value honesty above everything else." "Absolutely," Dad agreed. "Academic integrity is the foundation of scientific progress. Without it, research becomes meaningless." I looked directly at Ethan. "I completely agree, Dad. That's why I think it's so important to verify the originality of research, especially before it gets published in major journals." Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need to get to the library. Big project deadline coming up." "On Saturday?" I asked innocently. "The library's closed until Monday." He froze, caught in a lie that would have been meaningless to anyone else, but felt enormous in the context of everything I now knew. "Right. I meant I need to work on my laptop, at Coffee Shop, the new place downtown." The fumbled explanation made Dad frown slightly. Ethan never struggled with words. He was the articulate one, the charming one, the one who could talk his way into or out of anything. "Are you feeling all right, son?" Dad asked. "You seem a bit scattered this morning." "Just tired," Ethan replied quickly. "Late night working on the research proposal." But I knew he hadn't been working on any research proposal. According to the timestamps on my stolen files, he'd accessed them at 2 a.m., probably copying material for his next fraudulent publication. After Ethan left, claiming he needed fresh air to clear his head, I helped Mom clear the breakfast dishes. She hummed while she worked, the same melody she'd hummed when we were children, completely unaware that her perfect family was about to implode. "Mom," I said carefully, "can I ask you something about Ethan?" "Of course, honey. What about him?" "Have you ever actually read any of his published papers?" She paused in loading the dishwasher. "Well, no. They're very technical, beyond what I could understand. But his professors always speak so highly of his work. Dr. Morrison called him brilliant just last month." "What if I told you I could explain his research in terms you'd understand? Would you be interested?" Mom's face lit up with the enthusiasm she always showed when she thought she could connect with her children's achievements. "I'd love that. I've always felt a bit left out when you kids talk about your studies." That afternoon, while Dad was at his golf club, and Ethan was presumably hiding at whatever coffee shop he'd invented, I gave Mom a masterclass in my own stolen research. We sat in the living room, my laptop open between us, as I walked through the cardiovascular project that Ethan had been taking credit for. I showed her my original data models, my methodology notes, my preliminary findings. I explained it in simple terms, watching her face as understanding dawned. "This is incredible, Madison," she said, her voice filled with genuine pride. "You developed all this yourself?" "Every algorithm, every analysis, every conclusion," I confirmed. "I've been working on it for 3 years." "But wait," Mom said, her brow furrowing. "Didn't Ethan just describe this exact research at breakfast? The cardiovascular mortality reduction project?" The moment of truth had arrived. I could see the gears turning in her mind, fighting against a reality that would shatter everything she believed about her golden son. "Yes," I said quietly. "He did." Mom stared at the laptop screen, then back at me. "I don't understand. Are you collaborating with him? Did he help you develop this?" "No, Mom. I developed this entirely independently, but somehow Ethan has been presenting it as his own work to Harvard." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I watched my mother's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a dawning horror as the implications became clear. "You're saying Ethan stole your research?" she whispered. "I'm saying Ethan has been systematically plagiarizing my work for years. This cardiovascular project is just the most recent example." Mom stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our perfectly manicured backyard. "That's impossible, Madison. You must be mistaken. Maybe there was some miscommunication, or maybe you both came to similar conclusions independently." But even as she spoke the words, I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice, the protective mother fighting against the emerging evidence. "Mom, I can show you the timestamps on my files. I can show you the progression of my research over 3 years. I can show you exactly how my work appears in Ethan's publications, word for word in some cases." She turned from the window, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why would he do that? Ethan is brilliant on his own. He doesn't need to steal anyone's work." "I think," I said carefully, "Ethan has been struggling more than he's let on. The pressure to live up to expectations, to maintain his image as the golden child. It was probably easier to take shortcuts than to admit he was struggling. But that would mean—" Mom's voice broke. "That would mean his entire career is built on lies." "Not just lies, Mom. Lies about his own sister's work. Lies that have prevented me from getting proper credit for research that could actually help people." What happened next would test every assumption our family had ever made about loyalty, truth, and love. Mom sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands. "Your father," she whispered, "he's been so proud. He brags about Ethan to his colleagues constantly. The hospital board, the medical conferences, even our Christmas cards mention Ethan's research achievements." I felt a stab of sympathy for her. This wasn't just about Ethan's deception. It was about the public embarrassment our entire family would face when the truth came out. "I know this is difficult," I said, "but people need to know the truth. The research I've done has real applications that could save lives. When it's attributed to someone else, especially someone who doesn't understand the underlying principles, it becomes dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because Ethan doesn't actually understand the methodology well enough to answer questions about limitations or potential complications. If doctors start implementing treatments based on research they can't properly explain or modify, patients could be hurt." Mom looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What are you going to do?" That question would determine not just my future, but the future of our entire family. "I'm going to contact Harvard's Academic Integrity Office," I said. "I'm going to provide them with all the evidence I've gathered. I'm going to let them investigate and determine appropriate consequences." "But that could destroy Ethan's career," Mom protested. "He could be expelled. He could lose everything." "Mom, His career is already built on stolen work. This isn't destroying something legitimate, it's exposing something that was never real in the first place. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the family photos arranged on our mantel. Pictures of Ethan's graduation from high school as valedictorian, his acceptance to Harvard, his research presentations, images of a success story that was apparently fiction. "What about our family?" she asked finally. "What about your relationship with your brother?" "What relationship?" I replied, more sharply than I intended. "The one where he steals my work and takes credit for my achievements? The one where you and Dad praise him for my accomplishments while treating my actual contributions as irrelevant?" Mom flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not true, Madison. We've always been proud of you." "Have you? When was the last time Dad asked about my research without immediately comparing it to Ethan's? When was the last time you showed my achievements to your friends with the same enthusiasm you show his?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, because that's exactly what they were. "We love you both equally," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe you love us equally, but you don't treat us equally. You've spent so much energy protecting and promoting Ethan that you never noticed I was achieving things worth protecting and promoting too." Mom started crying then, quiet tears that spoke to years of unexamined assumptions and unconscious bias. "I never meant to make you feel less important." "I know you didn't mean to," I said, softening my tone. "But intent doesn't change impact, and the impact has been that Ethan learned he could get away with taking credit for other people's work, including mine, because our family system was set up to support that narrative." "So what happens now?" she asked. I looked at my mother, this woman who'd raised me to value honesty and integrity while unknowingly enabling the opposite, and made a decision that would change everything. "Now we wait for Dad and Ethan to come home," I said. "And then we're going to have a family meeting where everyone tells the truth for the first time in years." Mom nodded slowly, understanding that this conversation had been inevitable long before either of us was ready for it. "Will you wait until after Christmas, just to get through the holiday?" I thought about all the Christmas mornings where Ethan's achievements had overshadowed mine, all the family dinners where his stories got the spotlight while my accomplishments became footnotes. But what I said next would prove I was done protecting other people's comfort at the expense of my own truth. "No, Mom, we're having this conversation today, because the truth doesn't become less true just because the timing is inconvenient." She wiped her eyes and nodded again, recognizing something in my voice that hadn't been there before. Her little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who wouldn't be silenced or diminished anymore. If you're loving Madison's journey from doormat to warrior, smash that like button right now. And trust me, you'll want to subscribe, because what happens when Dad and Ethan come home will blow your mind. The sound of Dad's car pulling into the driveway an hour later made us both tense. Mom had spent the time looking through more of my research, asking questions that revealed how little she'd understood about my academic work despite 3 years of achievements. Her guilt was palpable as she realized how thoroughly she'd overlooked my accomplishments while celebrating Ethan's stolen ones. Dad walked in whistling, his golf game apparently having gone well. "How are my favorite ladies spending this beautiful Saturday?" "Richard," Mom said, her voice strained, "we need to talk, all of us, when Ethan gets home." Dad's cheerful expression faded as he registered the tension in the room. "Is everything all right? Is someone hurt?" "No one's hurt," I said. "But there's something you both need to know about Ethan's research." "What about his research?" Dad asked, his protective instincts immediately activated. But before I could answer, Ethan's key turned in the front door, and the moment of reckoning arrived. Ethan walked through the door carrying a coffee cup from Starbucks, not the fictional downtown cafe he'd invented that morning. His lie detector skills clearly needed work. He stopped short when he saw all 3 of us gathered in the living room, our faces reflecting the gravity of what was about to unfold. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Did someone die? Sit down, Ethan, Dad said, his tone carrying the authority he used in hospital board meetings. Your sister has something she needs to discuss with us. What happened next would prove that even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, some people will choose delusion over truth. Ethan's eyes darted between us, reading the room like a poker player calculating odds. He set his coffee down and perched on the edge of his usual armchair, ready to bolt if necessary. The golden boy who'd always commanded center stage suddenly looked like a child, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Madison, Dad prompted, what did you want to tell us? I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward the family. I want to talk about Ethan's cardiovascular research, the project he described this morning at breakfast. Okay, Ethan said slowly. What about it? The project you described is identical to research I've been conducting for 3 years. Methodology, conclusions, even specific terminology, word for word in many cases. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a dawning concern that made his jaw tighten. That's impossible, Ethan said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Maybe we came to similar conclusions independently. It happens in research all the time. Does it happen that your timestamps show you accessing my files at 2 in the morning? I asked, advancing to my next slide, because I have digital evidence of every time you've downloaded my work. The color drained from Ethan's face so fast I thought he might actually pass out right there in our living room. Dad leaned forward, studying the evidence on my screen. As chief of cardiology, he knew how to read research data. His expression grew increasingly grave as he absorbed what he was seeing. Ethan, Dad said quietly, these files show Madison's work dating back to her sophomore year. The timestamps are clear. I can explain, Ethan started, but Dad held up a hand. Before you say anything else, I want you to understand something. Academic fraud isn't just a university matter. In medical research, it can have licensing implications, career-ending implications. Mom had gone completely pale, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Please tell me this is all a misunderstanding, she whispered. It's not, I said gently. Ethan, I've documented 7 different publications where you've used my research without attribution. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is systematic plagiarism. But what Ethan said next would reveal the depth of his delusion and entitlement. So what if I used some of your ideas? He exploded, his careful composure finally cracking. You're an undergraduate. Your work would sit in some filing cabinet forever if I didn't elevate it to a level where it could actually matter. The room erupted. Dad shot to his feet like he'd been electrocuted. Mom gasped audibly. Even I was stunned by the brazenness of his justification. Elevate it? Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. You stole your sister's intellectual property and you think you were doing her a favor? I made it meaningful, Ethan insisted, standing to face Dad. Madison's just an undergrad at a state school. I'm at Harvard Medical. My name on research carries weight that hers never could. The arrogance in that statement would cost him everything, but he was too deep in his delusions to realize it. Your name, I said, my voice cutting through his rant, carries weight because it's attached to my work. Without my research, what exactly have you accomplished at Harvard? I've maintained a 3.8 GPA in one of the most demanding programs in the country, Churchill, he shot back. While cheating, Dad interjected. If this research is representative of your other work, then your entire academic record is suspect. Mom had started crying again, but these were different tears. Not the sympathetic tears of a mother learning difficult truth, but the devastated sobs of someone watching their world collapse. Ethan, she pleaded, tell us this is the only time. Tell us you made one mistake and it won't happen again. But I wasn't going to let him minimize this into a single error in judgment. It's not one mistake, Mom, I said, pulling up another folder on my laptop. Show them the publication list, Ethan. Show them how many of your breakthrough discoveries are actually my work. Ethan's face had gone from pale to red to a sickly gray color. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Everyone expects me to be perfect, to live up to Dad's reputation. Do you know what it's like being the son of Dr. Richard Parker at Harvard Medical? So you decided to steal from your sister? Dad's voice was getting louder. You decided that your pressure justified destroying her academic future? I wasn't destroying anything. She's getting the same education whether her name is on publications or not. That statement revealed everything wrong with how our family had operated for years. No, Ethan, I said, standing up to face him directly. Publications are how researchers build careers, grants, fellowships, graduate school admissions, job opportunities. They all depend on having a record of original research. You haven't just stolen my work, you've stolen my future. For the first time, Ethan seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he'd done. His shoulders sagged as the reality penetrated his wall of entitlement. I never thought about it that way, he mumbled. Because you never had to think about it, I replied. You've always been given credit for things you didn't earn, praised for, achievements you didn't accomplish. This family taught you that you deserved recognition regardless of effort. Mom looked up at me through her tears. What do you mean? This was the moment I'd been building toward, not just exposing Ethan's fraud, but addressing the family dynamics that had enabled it. I mean the way you celebrated Ethan's high school graduation party for 3 days while mine got a dinner at Applebee's. I mean the way Dad brags about Ethan's research to his colleagues while never mentioning my achievements. I mean the way Ethan learned that he could take credit for my science fair projects, my academic competitions, even my volunteer work, and you'd all just accept it because he was the golden child. The accusations hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years. That's not true, Dad protested, but his voice lacked conviction. When was the last time you asked about my research without immediately comparing it to Ethan's? I challenged. When was the last time you showed interest in my achievements without qualifying them as good for an undergraduate or promising for someone her age? Dad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The silence stretched uncomfortably as he searched his memory for examples that didn't exist. I've been invisible in this family unless I was useful to Ethan, I continued, and now I discover he's been literally stealing my work while you all praised him for it. But what Mom said next would reveal that she finally understood the true scope of the damage. Oh my God, she whispered. The science fair in 10th grade. Ethan's project on cellular regeneration. Madison, you did all the research for that. And the academic decathlon senior year, I added. I wrote his entire presentation on biochemical processes. But we thought you were helping him study, Dad said weakly. You thought I was helping him cheat, I corrected, and you were okay with it because he was the one getting the recognition. Ethan had been standing frozen throughout this exchange, watching his family's image of him crumble in real time. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me, Madison? The question that would determine whether this family could be salvaged or if it was too broken to repair. I want you to confess, I said simply. I want you to contact Harvard, your research supervisors, and every journal that's published your stolen work. I want you to admit what you've done and give proper attribution to the real author. That would destroy my career before it even starts, he protested. Your career was never real in the first place, Dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. A career built on fraud isn't a career worth having. Easy for you to say, Ethan snapped. You built your reputation legitimately. I was trying to live up to an impossible standard. So instead of working harder, you chose to steal easier, I said. And now you want sympathy for the consequences of your choices. But Ethan's next words would prove that even facing total exposure, He still didn't understand the gravity of his actions. "Fine," he said, his voice taking on a stubborn edge. "I'll admit I used some of your research. But I'm not throwing away 7 years of medical school for work that would have been worthless without my platform." The casual dismissal of my achievements, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, finally broke Dad's restraint. "Get out," Dad said, his voice deadly quiet. "What?" Ethan looked genuinely shocked. "Get out of this house. Get out until you can come back with a real apology and a plan to fix what you've destroyed." "Dad, you can't be serious. It's almost Christmas." "I'm completely serious. You've brought shame on this family, betrayed your sister, and shown no genuine remorse. Christmas is about love and family, values you clearly don't understand." Mom stood up, wiping her eyes. "Richard, maybe we should—" "No," Dad interrupted. "Alice, our son is a fraud and a thief. Our daughter is a brilliant researcher whose work has been stolen for years while we praise the thief. There's nothing to discuss until Ethan acknowledges what he's done and starts making amends. What happened next would prove that some people will choose pride over family, delusion over truth." Ethan looked around the room, searching for any ally, any supporter who might take his side. Finding none, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before: cold, calculating, vindictive. "You'll regret this," he said, pointing at me. "You think exposing me will make you the golden child? You think Mom and Dad will suddenly appreciate you more? They'll resent you for destroying their perfect son." "If being their perfect son required stealing from his sister," I replied, "then he was never perfect to begin with." Ethan stormed upstairs, presumably to pack a bag. The sound of drawers slamming and closet doors banging provided an angry soundtrack to the devastation in our living room. Dad sat down heavily, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Madison, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting your work, for not recognizing your achievements, and for creating a family dynamic where Ethan thought he could get away with this," I added. "Yes," Dad agreed, "for all of it." Mom had stopped crying but looked shell-shocked. "What happens now? What do we do about Christmas? About the family?" The question that would determine whether we could rebuild something honest from the wreckage of our broken family dynamic. "We start telling the truth," I said, "about Ethan's fraud, about the way this family has operated, about what needs to change going forward." "But the embarrassment," Mom whispered. "Your father's colleagues, our friends, the community. Everyone will know we raised a fraud." "No," Dad said firmly. "Everyone will know we raised a daughter, brilliant enough to conduct graduate-level research as an undergraduate, and that we finally gave her the recognition she deserved." But what I said next would show them I'd already planned for every contingency. "Actually," I said, opening a new folder on my laptop, "I've been documenting everything for months. I have a complete record of Ethan's fraud, timestamps proving my original authorship, and communication showing his knowledge of the theft." Dad looked at the organized evidence with professional appreciation. "This is incredibly thorough, Madison. You've built an airtight case." "I had to. I knew Ethan would deny everything, and I knew this family's first instinct would be to protect him rather than believe me. The accuracy of that prediction hung in the air uncomfortably." "So what's your plan?" Mom asked. "Monday morning, I'm sending this documentation to Harvard's Office of Academic Integrity, to every journal that's published Ethan's plagiarized work, and to the Medical Licensing Board in Massachusetts." "The licensing board?" Mom went pale again. "Academic fraud in medical research is a serious offense, Mom. It could affect his ability to practice medicine even after he graduates." Ethan chose that moment to reappear with a hastily packed duffel bag, his face set in grim determination. "I hope you're satisfied, Madison," he said from the doorway. "You've destroyed everything our family worked for." "No, Ethan," Dad replied before I could speak. "You destroyed everything when you chose to steal, rather than earn your achievements. We'll see how satisfied she is when Harvard expels me. And the family name becomes synonymous with academic fraud, Ethan shot back. The family name will be associated with raising a daughter whose research was good enough that her brother at Harvard Medical School felt compelled to steal it, I said. I can live with that. But Ethan's parting shot would reveal the depth of his narcissistic delusion. You think you've won something here, he said, hefting his bag. But when this is all over, you'll still be Madison Parker, unremarkable undergraduate, and I'll find a way to rebuild what you've torn down. Goodbye, Ethan, Dad said simply. Don't come back until you understand that what Madison tore down was never legitimately yours to begin with. The front door slammed with a finality that echoed through the house. For several minutes, none of us spoke. The silence felt different now, not tense or uncomfortable, but clean, like air after a storm has cleared. So, Mom said finally, Christmas Eve is tomorrow. I looked at my parents, these people who'd raised me to value honesty while unknowingly enabling its opposite, and made a decision that surprised even me. We're still a family, I said. A smaller, more honest family, but still a family. And that's when Dad said something that would begin healing years of damage. Madison, he said, his voice thick with emotion, would you be willing to present your research to my colleagues at the hospital? I want them to meet the brilliant researcher whose work we should have been celebrating all along. The offer hung between us like a bridge across the chasm that had divided our family for years. I'd love that, Dad, I said, and meant it. Christmas Eve the next day was quieter than any we'd had in years, but it was also the most honest. We talked about my research, my plans for graduate school, my hopes for contributing to medical science. For the first time in my life, I felt seen by my parents as an individual rather than as Ethan's shadow. But the real vindication would come when Harvard's investigation concluded 3 weeks later. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, Harvard's Dean of Academic Affairs, called me personally to discuss the investigation results. Her voice was grave, but impressed as she described the thoroughness of my documentation. Ms. Parker, I want you to know that your evidence led to one of the most comprehensive academic fraud investigations in Harvard Medical School's history. Mr. Parker has been expelled, and all publications bearing his name have been retracted pending proper attribution. What happens to the research itself? I asked. That's why I'm calling. Harvard Medical School would like to offer you a position in our summer research program with full attribution for your previous work. Your cardiovascular research has genuine merit, and we believe it deserves proper development. The irony was perfect. Ethan's theft had inadvertently brought my work to Harvard's attention, leading to the very opportunities he'd been trying to deny me. 6 months later, I stood in the same lecture hall where Ethan had given his fraudulent presentations, delivering my own research to a room full of medical professionals. Dad sat in the front row, beaming with genuine pride as I discussed methodology he finally understood I'd developed independently. If Madison's journey from invisible sister to recognized researcher has kept you hooked, absolutely destroy that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice, truth, and family redemption. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when golden children finally face the consequences of their actions. The Q&A session after my presentation lasted an hour, with doctors and researchers asking detailed questions about applications and implications. For the first time in my life, I was being recognized for my own achievements, not compared to someone else, or diminished by association. After the presentation, Dr. Morrison approached me with a smile. Ms. Parker, I have an offer I think will interest you. Harvard Medical School would like to extend an invitation for you to complete your undergraduate degree here with full scholarship and guaranteed admission to our MD-PhD program. The offer was everything Ethan had dreamed of, handed to me based on the very work he'd tried to steal. But the real victory came when I realized I didn't need their validation to know my worth. Thank you for the offer, Dr. Morrison, I said. But I'm actually very happy with my program at Georgetown. They've recognized my abilities from the beginning, and loyalty matters to me. 6 months after that, I received a letter from Ethan. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on plain paper. His handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but the words were clear. Madison, I know this letter is long overdue, and I know no words can undo what I did. I've spent the last year in therapy, trying to understand how I became someone capable of stealing from his own sister. You were right about everything. I was given so much unearned praise that I never learned how to actually achieve anything on my own. When the work got difficult, cheating seemed easier than admitting I wasn't as brilliant as everyone claimed. I'm working at a clinic in rural Montana now, starting over as a medical assistant. It's humbling work, but it's honest. I'm learning what it means to earn respect rather than expect it. I've contacted every journal and institution where your work was published under my name. Full retractions with public acknowledgement of the real author are in process. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed, and I'm spending the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of calling you sister. Ethan. I read the letter twice, then filed it away with the rest of the evidence from that period. Not because I needed to keep score, but because it represented something important. The moment someone chose growth over pride, truth over delusion. The story could have ended there, with perfect justice and complete vindication. But real life, I discovered, is more complex than fairy tales. 2 years later, Ethan called me. Not to ask for anything, but to tell me he'd been accepted to a physician assistant program in Seattle. His voice was different, quieter, more thoughtful, carrying the weight of genuine humility. I wanted you to know, he said, that I'm finally doing the work myself, all of it. And Madison, the work is hard, really hard. It makes me understand just how brilliant you were to accomplish what you did so young. We talked for an hour that day, not as the golden child and the scapegoat, but as two people who'd survived a toxic family dynamic and found ways to heal from it. Do you think, he asked as our conversation wound down, that there's a chance we could rebuild some kind of relationship? Not the old one, but something honest? I thought about forgiveness then, not as absolution, but as freedom from the weight of carrying someone else's mistakes. I think, I said carefully, that rebuilding requires both people to be different than they were. You're doing the work to change. I'm learning to set boundaries instead of being invisible. Maybe there's something new we can build from that. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something more practical. The recognition that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of examining who they've been and choosing to become someone better. Today, I'm Dr. Madison Parker, with my own research lab and a growing reputation in cardiovascular medicine. Ethan is working his way through PA school with no shortcuts, no stolen work, no unearned advantages. Our parents have learned to celebrate my achievements without asterisks or qualifications. The golden child family dynamic didn't just hurt me. It almost destroyed Ethan by convincing him he was entitled to success without effort. Some people ask if I'm glad I exposed him. The answer is yes, because the truth set us all free. Free from the pretense, free from the inequality, free from the toxic patterns that had poisoned our family for years. The research that Ethan stole has gone on to influence treatment protocols in hospitals across the country. Patients are living longer, healthier lives because work I did as an undergraduate is finally being applied under my name with my understanding of its limitations and applications. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not even justice, but the knowledge that truth wins in the end, and that sometimes destroying something false is the only way to build something real. The last thing people usually ask is whether I would do it all again, knowing the pain it would cause our family. My answer is always the same. I didn't break our family. I revealed that it was already broken, and sometimes the only way to heal something is to stop pretending it was never injured in the first place. Christmas Eve this year, 3 years after the confrontation that changed everything, our family gathered again. Smaller now, but honest. Dad asked about my research without comparing it to anyone else's. Mom showed photos of my lab to her friends with genuine pride, and in the silence where Ethan's presence used to dominate, there was finally space for the rest of us to be heard. If this story of family justice and personal triumph resonated with you, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible true stories, and drop a comment about the moment that hit you hardest. Because everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and credited for their real achievements. That's how the golden child learned that stolen achievements crumble eventually, while earned accomplishments last forever. And that's how the invisible daughter finally stepped into the light she'd been creating all along.